November 12, 1944. The South Pacific. Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Cunningham, watching his ship sink beneath him. Around him in the dark water, 47 of his crew clung to debris, waiting for rescue. Many were injured, some were dying, and almost all of them believed the same thing. Their captain had abandoned them. For the next 50 years, Robert Hayes would carry that burden. His own crew members refused to speak to him. His superiors quietly ended his career. His wife died never knowing the truth. His children grew up ashamed of their father's name. But in 1994, when a military historian opened a classified file that had been sealed for half a century, everything changed. What they discovered wasn't the story of a coward who ran from battle. It was the story of a man who sacrificed everything, including his honor, to save thousands of lives. This is that story. If you value these forgotten stories of sacrifice, hit that subscribe button. These silent soldiers deserve to be remembered. Before we understand what happened that night in 1944, you need to understand who Robert Hayes was. He wasn't a glory seeker. He'd grown up in a small town in Ohio, the son of a schoolteacher and a factory worker. Joined the Navy in 1936 because it meant steady work during the Depression. He was good at his job, steady, reliable. The kind of officer men trusted because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. By 1944, Hayes was 32 years old. He'd already survived 2 years of brutal Pacific fighting. He'd seen ships burn, watched friends die, pulled men from oil-slicked water. He had a wife back home, Margaret, and 2 young children he'd only seen in photographs for 18 months. The USS Cunningham was a Fletcher-class destroyer. Not the biggest ship in the fleet, not the most glamorous, but vital. These destroyers were the workhorses of the Pacific War, escorts for carrier groups, submarine hunters, the first line of defense. Hayes took command in August 1944. His crew was a mix of veterans and green kids fresh from training. Most were younger than him. Some were teenagers who'd lied about their age to enlist. One of those young sailors was Ensign Thomas Miller, just 22 years old, fresh from Annapolis. The skipper wasn't the loudest officer I ever served under, Miller recalled decades later. But when he spoke, you listened. He had this way of staying calm, no matter what was happening. We trusted him completely. That trust would be tested in ways none of them could imagine. November 9, 1944. The Cunningham was on routine patrol, part of a larger operation to protect American supply lines in the South Pacific. Japanese submarine activity had increased. Convoys were being hit. Men were dying. The Cunningham's orders were straightforward. Patrol a specific grid, hunt for submarines, report any contact, engage if necessary. But 3 days before they sailed, something unusual happened. 2 men in civilian suits came aboard. They didn't wear uniforms, didn't salute, and they carried briefcases with combination locks. They asked to speak with Lieutenant Commander Hayes. Alone, what happened in that meeting? Hayes couldn't tell anyone, not his executive officer, not his crew, not even his wife in the letters he wrote home. But 50 years later, when the files were finally opened, we learned exactly what those 2 men said. They were from Naval Intelligence, and they had a problem. American cryptographers had broken Japanese naval codes. They could read enemy communications almost as fast as the Japanese themselves. This was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war. Only a handful of people knew the truth, and that secret had revealed something critical. The Japanese were setting a trap. A wolfpack of 8 Japanese submarines was assembling in Hayes Patrol area, but they weren't there to hunt convoys. They were bait. Japanese Naval Intelligence had detected a pattern in American destroyer patrols. They knew roughly where ships like the Cunningham would be. The plan was elegant and deadly. Put submarines in position where they'd be detected. When the American destroyer moved in to engage, a second force, a surface group of destroyers and a light cruiser, would close in from behind, ambush the hunter. The Japanese had used this tactic before. It worked. American ships had been sunk. But this time, American intelligence knew it was coming. They could see the whole board, and they had a chance to turn the trap inside out. if they could get a destroyer to find the submarines, to engage just long enough to confirm a location, and then retreat, drawing a Japanese surface force into a specific area. American submarines lying in wait could ambush the ambushers. It was brilliant strategy, but it required something almost impossible. It required an American captain to turn his ship around in the face of the enemy, to retreat, to let his crew think he'd lost his nerve, and it required that captain to never, ever explain why. The intelligence officers laid it out for Hayes in that locked cabin. The mission, the stakes, the cost. "You look like a coward," one of them said. "Your crew will lose faith in you. The Navy will have to discipline you publicly to maintain the deception. You'll likely never command a ship again." Hayes asked one question. "If this works, how many lives do we save?" The officer answered honestly. "The Japanese submarines in this wolfpack would target our supply convoys. Based on their previous success rate, they'd sink at least 20 cargo ships over the next 6 months. Maybe more. That's thousands of tons of supplies. Thousands of American sailors and merchant marine." Hayes looked at the classified file, at the decoded Japanese messages, at the trap laid for him and his crew. Then he looked at the photographs of his wife and children he kept on his desk. "When do we sail?" he asked. "November 12th, 1944. 0400 hours. Darkness on the Pacific. The Cunningham sonar operator picked up the first contact at 0417. Submarine. Range for 1,000 yards. Then another, and another. Hayes was called to the bridge. His executive officer, Lieutenant Commander James Riley, was already there. "Skipper, we've got at least 4 submarines. Maybe more. They're not running. They're just sitting there." It was strange. Submarines detected by destroyers usually tried to escape, diving deep, running silent. These weren't moving. Riley looked at Hayes. "It's like they want us to find them." Hayes knew exactly what it was. The bait, just like the intelligence report predicted. But he couldn't tell Riley that. "Sound general quarters." Hayes ordered, "All ahead full. Prepare depth charge attack." The crew rushed to battle stations. They drilled for this. Hunt the submarines. Kill them before they could kill American ships. This was what they trained for. The Cunningham accelerated, closing the distance. 1,500 yards. 1,000 yards. In range. Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the dark water. Somewhere out there, beyond his vision, the Japanese surface force was moving, closing in, right on schedule. He waited, let his ship close to 800 yards. Let the sonar get a perfect firing solution. Let his crew prepare the depth charge patterns. And then he gave the order that would define the rest of his life. All engines stop. Come about. Heading 270. All ahead full. Silence on the bridge. Riley stared at him. "Sir, we're in attack position. We have them." Hayes kept his voice level. "Calm. I said come about. XO. Now." The helmsman looked between Hayes and Riley, confused. The fire control officer's hand hovered over the depth charge release. Riley stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Captain, are you sure about this?" And here it was. The moment Hayes had known was coming. The moment he had to become something he wasn't. "I'm sure, XO. Execute the order." The Cunningham turned, away from the enemy, away from the submarines they'd been hunting. Ensign Miller was in the Combat Information Center when the turn happened. "I thought it was a tactical maneuver at first," he remembered. "Like we were repositioning for a better angle. But then we kept turning. And I heard the XO's voice over the comm. He sounded... I'd never heard him sound like that before. Uncertain. The crew felt it immediately. Something was wrong. The captain was retreating. Hayes stood on the bridge, watching the faces of his officers. Confusion. Disbelief. And then something worse. Doubt. He'd been their captain for 3 months. They'd trusted him. And now, in their first real engagement, he was running. Hayes ordered the radio operator to send a message. Breaking contact. Returning to station. It was the message Naval Intelligence needed. The coded confirmation that Phase 1 was complete. But his crew didn't know that. All they knew was their captain had turned away from a fight. And then, at 0445 hours, everything went to hell. The torpedoes came from the starboard side, not from the submarines ahead of them, from behind. The Japanese surface force, right where intelligence said they'd be. The first torpedo missed. The second hit the Cunningham amidships, below the waterline. The explosion tore through the engine room. 13 men died instantly. The ship lurched, metal screaming. Lights went out. Emergency klaxons wailed. On the bridge, Riley grabbed support beam as the deck tilted. Damage report. Hayes shouted. The reports came in. Engine room flooding. Fires on the main deck. Power failing. And another report. Surface contacts. Japanese destroyers closing fast. The Cunningham was dying, dead in the water, and enemy ships were moving in for the kill. Riley looked at Hayes, and in that look was everything. We ran, and they still got us. Hayes gave the order to abandon ship. All hands, this is the captain. Abandon ship. I repeat, abandon ship. This is not a drill. The crew went into the dark Pacific. Men jumped from the tilting deck. Life raft inflated. The Cunningham was sinking fast now, the bow already underwater. Hayes was the last man off. By tradition, by duty, the captain leaves last. The water was cold. Oil from ruptured fuel tanks spread across the surface. Men coughed, gasped, tried to find something to hold on to. The Japanese destroyers didn't stop to pick up survivors. They circled once, searchlights cutting through the darkness, and then they were gone. Back to base. They'd done their job, killed another American destroyer. Except they hadn't just killed a destroyer. They'd sailed right into the kill box. 3 American submarines had been repositioned based on Hayes' coded message. They'd been waiting, silent, deep, and when the Japanese ships came through, confident, celebrating their victory, the American torpedoes found them. Over the next 40 minutes, 8 Japanese submarines and 2 destroyers were sent to the bottom. Over 2,000 Japanese sailors died. It was one of the most successful submarine ambushes in the Pacific War. But the men in the water didn't know that. All they knew was their ship was gone, their friends were dead, and their captain had run. Ensign Miller clung to a piece of debris near Hayes. I didn't say anything to him, Miller recalled. None of us did. We just floated there, waiting for rescue, and the silence was worse than any words. Rescue came at dawn. A friendly destroyer picked up 47 survivors. 153 men had died. When they pulled Hayes from the water, he didn't speak. He wrapped himself in a blanket and sat alone. The crew whispered. The officers avoided his eyes. And Robert Hayes began a 50-year silence. The Navy convened a board of inquiry. Standard procedure after losing a ship. Hayes' testimony was brief. He detected submarines, engaged, detected surface contacts, took a torpedo, gave the order to abandon ship. When asked why he'd broken off the attack on the submarines, Hayes said, simply, tactical assessment. I judged the risk unacceptable. The board cleared him of cowardice formally. No court-martial, no brig time. But the judgment was there in the careful wording. No evidence of deliberate dereliction of duty. Not exactly a ringing endorsement. Hayes was reassigned. A desk in Pearl Harbor, then San Diego. Logistics, supply chains, as far from command as possible while technically still serving. He never got another ship. Lieutenant Commander Riley, his XO, survived the sinking. After the war, he became a successful businessman in Boston. When asked about the Cunningham in interviews, he'd say only, "We did our duty." But in private, to friends, he said something else. Hayes lost his nerve. It happens. War breaks some men. Ensign Miller went on to command his own destroyer by 1945. He had a long Navy career, retired as a captain in 1968. In all those years, he never once reached out to Robert Hayes. I was ashamed to, he admitted in 1994, because I believed the worst about him, and I never questioned it. Hayes returned home to Ohio in 1946. His wife, Margaret, had waited for him. But the man who came home wasn't the man who'd left. He didn't talk about the war. didn't attend veteran reunions. When his son asked him about his service, Hayes would say only, "I did what I had to do." Margaret Hayes died in 1983. Lung cancer. Near the end, delirious with medication. She said something to her daughter. "I wish I knew what happened to your father in the war. I wish I knew what he carries." Robert Hayes sat beside her bed and said nothing. In 1994, a young military historian named Dr. Sarah Chun was researching submarine warfare in the Pacific. She'd gotten clearance to review recently declassified Naval Intelligence files. She found a folder marked Operation Broken Anchor, November 1944. Inside were decoded Japanese messages, American submarine positioning orders, and a name, Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes, USS Cunningham. Dr. Chin spent 3 weeks piecing it together. The trap, the counter-trap, the coded message in Hayes' retreat order, the submarine ambush that followed. And then she found Hayes' name in the phone book. Robert Hayes, age 82, living in a retirement community in San Diego. She called him, "Mr. Hayes, did you know about Operation Broken Anchor?" Silence on the line. Then, "Are you calling to tell me I can finally talk about it?" They met 2 days later. Dr. Chin brought the files. Hayes brought 50 years of silence. "They told me I could never explain," Hayes said, "that the intelligence methods had to stay secret. I gave my word. The files are declassified now, Mr. Hayes. You can tell the truth." Hayes was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "The truth is, 153 of my men died that night, and I gave the orders that put them in that position. Declassified or not, that's what I live with." Dr. Chin published her findings. The story made small waves in military history circles. Some newspapers ran pieces. Disgraced captain actually war hero. But by then, most people who'd care were dead. Ensign Miller, now Captain Miller, retired, read the article in his living room. He called Hayes immediately. "Skipper," Miller said. "I was crying." I said, "Skipper, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Hayes' voice was gentle. "You had no way of knowing, Tom. None of you did. That was the point. But all those years, we thought. I know what you thought. It's okay." "Sir, I should have trusted you." Hayes was quiet. Then, "You're calling me now. That's enough." 12 other survivors were still alive. They all reached out. Some apologized. Some just wanted to talk to the man they'd served under. A few organized a reunion. November 12, 1995. 51 years after the Cunningham sank, 8 survivors attended. They met at a hotel in San Diego. And for the first time in 5 decades, they called Robert Hayes captain without doubt in their voices. Miller gave a speech. "We spent 50 years thinking our captain had failed us. Turns out he saved thousands of lives and never said a word. That's not failure. That's the definition of service." They saluted. Old men in their 70s, bodies worn but backs straight. Hayes saluted back. Robert Hayes died in 1997 at the age of 85. 8 survivors of the USS Cunningham came to his funeral. They wore their uniforms. They saluted his casket. The Navy sent a formal letter of commendation to his children. It outlined Operation Broken Anchor, the 8 Japanese submarines sunk, the estimated thousands of American lives saved. It ended with, "Your father's sacrifice and silence exemplified the highest traditions of naval service." His daughter kept the letter. His son said later, "I spent my whole childhood thinking my dad was ashamed of his service. Turns out he was carrying a secret too important to share, even with us." Today, Robert Hayes' name appears in exactly one place, a footnote in a naval history book about submarine warfare. Most people will never know his story, but that's what Silent Soldier's POV is for. To remember the ones who couldn't speak, the ones who sacrificed in silence. If this story moved you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell us, could you carry a burden like this for 50 years? And subscribe, because there are more stories like Robert Hayes. Stories of silent soldiers who deserved better than history gave them. They called him a coward, but he was something else entirely. He was a man who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the world think you're weak.